diligence, grace, and a sincere commitment to ensuring that every vote was counted and every voice was heard. And now, as the unofficial results are wrapping up, we now turn to the canvassing part of the process, which involves a bipartisan process of checks and balances that will proceed over the next 13 days. As that stage begins in Michigan, and as we continue to see the results of this historic election unfold nationwide, I would caution everyone against spreading misinformation designed to further efforts to sow seeds of doubt about the integrity of our elections here in Michigan and throughout the country. Whether it's doctored images, staged demonstrations, false tweets, or frivolous lawsuits, the purpose is all the same: to reduce the public's faith in our elections and their outcomes. But those efforts will not succeed. In Michigan, the process worked. Our system is secure, accurate, and anyone who tells you otherwise is attacking our democracy or unhappy with the results. We will continue to tell the truth and the true story of how in Michigan we successfully ran an election with record-breaking voter turnout in the midst of a pandemic. But we cannot do this alone. We need every voter and citizen to prepare to counter misinformation and disinformation that may continue to escalate in the days ahead. Stand up in support of our democracy. Join us in correcting misinformation and false allegations. Do not allow scare tactics and lies to win the day. Do not allow foreign or domestic actors to discredit our elections and attack our democracy. We need voters, members of the media, and elected officials and other leaders to stand vigilant with us, to commit to reporting only verifiable, accurate information in the days ahead, not just about Michigan, but about every state in our country. And above all else, demonstrate your patriotism by standing up in support of the integrity of our elections. However the days ahead play out, the health of our nation and our democracy requires us to come together in respect of the will of our voters and the sanctity of our elections process. In Michigan, I am proud to confirm that all valid ballots and only valid ballots have been counted securely and accurately, and that our election results reflect the will of the people. And now I'm happy to take questions, and thank you all again for your work tonight. And I want to also take a moment as we begin to take questions to really emphasize and underscore the extraordinary amount of work that went into this election, with over 1,500 clerks all around our state and 83 county clerks who have worked diligently alongside tens of thousands of election workers to meet and exceed every expectation of this year's election. Their work truly underscores that they are not just the most valuable players in our democracy, but they are the heroes of our democracy. And they come from all backgrounds, all political parties. And I'm so grateful that because of them, we're able to stand here tonight and show, again, results from Michigan that accurately reflect the will of the people. Thank you.
First up, we have Jim Kirsten with WXID.
Good evening, Secretary. My question is on the lawsuit from the Trump campaign. You just used in your opening statement frivolous lawsuits. Are you calling this lawsuit frivolous? And what are your thoughts going into the court system where your directive on the ban on open carry guns was, no pun intended, shot down by the Court of Claims and the Michigan Court of Appeals? And the third part of this question is, do you think this is the lawsuit that the president intends to take to the United States Supreme Court?
Yes, I do believe it's frivolous. And I'm really gratified, as I mentioned, that our elections on Tuesday were smooth. And as I've said repeatedly, going through this process, and as the Court of Appeals in the case you mentioned underscored, that voter intimidation in Michigan is illegal, that brandishing a firearm or in any way threatening to harm our voters on the way to vote was illegal, and that we were ready to respond quickly and swiftly if any of those incidents occurred in Michigan. Now, thankfully, they didn't, and I'm really glad that voters listened to us, that they heard our call for peace and calm to make our precincts, as I mentioned, places where people were proud to go, proud to bring their kids to watch the democratic process in action. That was the story of Tuesday. It was a story of voters from all backgrounds and both sides of the aisle respecting the process, respecting each other, and protecting everyone's right to vote. So I'm grateful for that. And, you know, it's sort of starkly different from the use of the legal system to file frivolous claims as a way of sowing seeds of doubt among the public about the integrity of our elections. And so, as my remarks just underscored, I think it's time that we all come together and not allow frivolous lawsuits or any effort to misinform the public about the truth behind our elections to succeed. And I will remain steadfastly determined in the days ahead to ensure we continue to correct false information and continue to tell the story, the extraordinary story of our elections here in Michigan this year, of our clerks rising to the occasion all across the state, managing and overseeing a high turnout, record-breaking voter turnout election in the midst of a pandemic, and still delivering results efficiently, effectively, securely, and accurately to the American people.
Next up will be Beth LeBon from the District News.
Hi, Secretary.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, I had a quick question. You mentioned at the beginning that the process of tabulation is nearly complete. Of the 100,000 that were outstanding this morning, how many are left that still need to be counted, and in which communities do those still need to be counted?
The tabulation process is complete. Now there's a final process of reporting out those results, finalizing them, reporting them out to the county. That's actually happening, as I mentioned, as we speak. But I wanted to emphasize that the tabulation, particularly in the communities I mentioned earlier, has been completed and is in the final stages of being prepared to be published, and again, providing that full and unofficial tabulation so that we can now move into the canvassing process, moving towards that official tabulation in the 13 days ahead.
Next will be Hillary.
We've been listening to Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson give an update on the counting process in the state, which she characterized as ahead of schedule. She also said that President Trump's campaign's lawsuits she characterized as frivolous. And she also said that anyone attacking the integrity of the vote doesn't like, essentially, the results of the vote. Finally, the Secretary of State said that it's the obligation of all people to fight back against disinformation. We have to take a quick break now, but we've got a lot more of news ahead. Stick with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBS in Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO. Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area, always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to Black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
President Trump and Joe Biden both see Pennsylvania and its 20 electoral votes as essential in their race to secure the White House. The president currently has about a 6-point lead over the former vice president, but the Biden campaign is expecting that margin will close. Pennsylvania began Wednesday with about 1 million mail-in ballots left to count, but that process may come to a standstill thanks to legal action being taken by the Trump campaign. Here's CBS News national correspondent Jerika Duncan.
Well, Lana, after speaking with several voters over the last 24 hours, it is clear that the mood here in Pennsylvania is shifting from excited to tense as people want to know what the final results are here in this historic election. I want to take you inside the Pennsylvania Convention Center, though. That is where you'll find over 100 election workers who continue to count ballots around the clock. roughly 120,000 mail-in ballots still need to be counted in Philadelphia alone. Officials warn this year's vote tally would take longer than normal because for the first time, more than 2.5 million people voted by mail throughout this state's 67 counties. Democrats, of course, hoping to reclaim this state. It was blue for every presidential election since 1988 until Trump turned it red in 2016. The governor of Pennsylvania said today that the delay as we move forward in this voting process proves that the system is working, urging Pennsylvanians, Lana, to be patient.
All right. Thank you, Jerika. Hard to be patient. For more on the race for Pennsylvania, I want to bring in Democratic Senator Bob Casey, who has represented the Keystone State on Capitol Hill since 2006. Senator Casey, great to have you with us. How do you feel right now in terms of being patient and how you feel about Democrats in your state?
Well, like a lot of people, we're trying to be patient, but it's been it's already been a long process. But it may take a little bit longer to get to 100% of the vote, but I think when all the votes are counted, Joe Biden will carry Pennsylvania. I think he'll carry it by somewhere near 100,000. It could be less than that, could be more. But the gap now is about 200,000. President Trump started the day ahead by 600,000. It's down to 200. And I think ultimately that will be that he'll be overtaken, and Vice President Biden will carry the state. But it is a difficult process because you're implementing a new voting system in the middle of a pandemic, and I know folks are working very hard in a lot of counties to count every vote.
Absolutely. And we knew heading into all of this that it was going to take some time to count all of Pennsylvania's ballots. But with the president now attempting to stop the counting through lawsuits, when do you expect Pennsylvania will actually be able to declare a winner?
Well, look, I think that we're going to know who has the most votes in a short time frame. The legal proceedings that will be undertaken really are determinations the court has to make. But we're going to know the winner, and we're going to make sure that every vote gets counted. I know the governor's committed to that. State officials are, and I think county officials are. But the president's attempts to stop ballots from being counted is really an insult to the voters. It is in large measure it's a thwarting of democracy itself. Undermining the right to vote is really violative of everything we claim to stand for as Americans. And I think the president should just accept that every vote should be counted. Once every vote is counted, he can make his decision then about what he's going to do. But he should accept the will of the people, and the only way you can do that is to have every vote counted. These votes being counted today are Trump voters and Biden voters alike. So.
Senator Casey, my father's family is all from Pittsburgh, so I feel a great deal of affinity for Pennsylvania. My grandmother lived there. I'd spent a lot of time in this state. And one of the things that I think is very interesting about your state is really how very diverse it is in terms of voters in the urban centers, from Philly to Pittsburgh to all of the rural areas in between. It really is an interesting moment in America's history that seems to be playing out in your state. Nonetheless, Joe Biden says he's feeling very confident about winning the state, and I want to play some of what he had to say for our viewers.
And I feel very good about Pennsylvania. Virtually all the remaining ballots to be counted were cast by mail, and we've been winning 78% of the votes by mail in Pennsylvania.
So, two parts to my question. First of all, are these mail-in ballots, given the projections that you see, are they enough for Biden to win the state of Pennsylvania? And then the other part of my question is, will Pennsylvania continue to be a state that Democrats and Republicans fight over? How are you seeing the changing demographics in your state playing out in terms of national politics?
Well, Lena, that's a great question because that the voting trends in our state have changed dramatically in just the last 25 years. It used to be that a candidate could get a big margin in Philadelphia, would lose all of the Philadelphia suburban counties, would lose parts of the middle of the state, maybe try to break even or cut into northeastern Pennsylvania. But then all of western Pennsylvania was blue territory in those days. But that pretty much ended or began to end in the 1990s, where the place in the state where the population was increasing was becoming more and more blue. So now, for example, Vice President Biden will win Philadelphia by a big margin. It could be as big a win there as President Obama. He'll do better than President Obama and Secretary Clinton in the 4 suburban counties. So that's a real head of steam coming out of the southeast. But western Pennsylvania is dramatically different than when I was starting out in politics. So now you win Allegheny County, which is over my left shoulder on this map. You win that county, but the counties around it are much more difficult. So what I think Vice President Biden did well is he was able to limit the deficit in a lot of rural counties where President Trump had a high vote, but maximize the vote in urban and suburban communities. So I think that combination will be a winning combination for him.
Before I let you go, Senator, I want to talk a little bit about what's happening on Capitol Hill. Democrats were really hoping to take control of the Senate this year. In fact, it seemed like Democrats felt perhaps even more confident about that heading into the election than necessarily the presidential race. But at this point, it doesn't look too likely. So what's at the top of your party's agenda in the next Congress? And do you think that there's still any possibility that Democrats are going to be able to exert more control in the Senate than they have in at least the last session of Congress?
Well, we'll see with regard to what happens in the Senate elections. Some of them are still being decided. But I would have to say it's uphill for us to get the majority. And that's a source of great disappointment and frustration for me. But I think, regardless of the outcome of the Senate elections, we have certain fundamental duties, I think, ahead of us because of the grave crisis the nation faces with a raging pandemic and a jobs and economic crisis that we really have not dealt with in a fulsome manner beyond the CARES Act. So the first order of business, in my judgment, has to be in November and December passing a robust relief bill. In my judgment, it should be something very similar to what the House passed, led by Speaker Pelosi. They acted responsibly way back in May. Senate Republicans sat on their hands, did nothing on these issues for many months. And I think that has to be addressed this year, this calendar year. But then in January, with a new administration, I think it'll be a Biden administration. But regardless, I think Democrat or Republican, no matter who's controlling the United States Senate, we have to address this economic challenge. And that means, I think, passing legislation very much akin to what was passed in the 1930s in the New Deal. We need a jobs program. We need a program to deal with this economic calamity. That is going to be difficult. But we have to meet that moment, even as we're trying to confront and deal with the reality of climate change, as well as make progress on a racial reckoning in reform and police reform. We have healthcare battles ahead. So there's a set of problems, the likes of which very few Congresses or presidents have had to face.
Yeah, we certainly saw from the exit polls voters saying overwhelmingly that they are looking, whether they are Republicans, Democrats, or independents, for some economic relief. Senator Bob Casey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
In Health Watch, tens of thousands of moms suffer from life-threatening complications related to pregnancy and childbirth every year. Now, federal health officials are launching a new campaign to raise awareness and help more mothers survive. Elise Preston has the details.
He's the one who noticed his mom's face was swollen.
In a powerful new PSA campaign, the Centers for Disease Control wants you to hear the stories of mothers who almost lost their lives while trying to have a baby.
Oh, you're fine. You're pregnant. Like,
nearly 700 mothers each year die from complications during and after pregnancy. Omari Maynard's partner is one of them. He says Shamani Gibson told the doctor she was in pain, but she still died of a pulmonary embolism just days after an emergency C-section.
Do I feel like she was being ignored? I feel like the care could have been a lot better if they were listening to her.
Mothers are increasingly dying from infection, hemorrhaging, and preeclampsia. 2/3 of the deaths are preventable. The Hear Her campaign hopes to encourage mothers and those around them to know the warning signs.
A headache that seems severe and will not go away. Unusual swelling, of the feet.
CDC Director of Reproductive Health, Dr. Wanda Barfield, says the timing of the campaign is even more critical with the COVID-19 pandemic.
Women may be concerned that they can't be seen by a provider, but if they have a pregnancy-related complication or a significant warning sign, it's really important that they reach out.
This campaign will target cities where maternal mortality rates are the highest, including New York, St. Louis, and Atlanta.
Gibson's 2 children are now growing up without their mom.
She just loved family. She loved the community. And, she was just excited about being a mother.
Maynard hopes this campaign will prevent his nightmare from happening to other families. Elise Preston, CBS News, New York.
Voters in 32 states weighed in on 120 ballot measures at the polls, covering issues from the minimum wage to legalizing marijuana and pit bulls. Danya Bacchus breaks it all down for us.
Expect more marijuana dispensaries to start opening up around the country in 2021. Voters in New Jersey, Arizona, South Dakota, and Montana approved measures legalizing recreational marijuana for adults 21 and older. Medical marijuana won approval in Mississippi.
Might help the economy as far as bringing another industry to the state of Mississippi.
On Tuesday, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize possession of small amounts of hard drugs like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. Voters there also made it legal for people in therapy sessions to use the psychedelic drug in mushrooms. Florida minimum wage workers who fought for more money are getting it. The Sunshine State will gradually increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. Rideshare drivers for companies like Uber and Lyft did not get what they wanted in California. Voters rejected the state's initiative to make drivers employees who receive benefits instead of independent contractors. Uber and Lyft spent $200 million to defeat the initiative, the most expensive effort in state history. The companies threatened to leave California if the measure passed. Anti-abortion amendments were on the ballots in 2 states. Louisiana voters passed a measure asserting there is no state constitutional right to abortion. In Colorado, voters defeated a measure to prevent abortions after 22 weeks unless the woman's life is endangered. In Mississippi, voters decided on a new flag with a magnolia design that replaces their old flag with the Confederate battle emblem. And in Denver, you can legally own a pit bull now. Pit bulls have been outlawed since 1989 in that city, following a high-profile attack on a 3-year-old. Danya Bacchus, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Tech companies are struggling to curb the spread of misinformation and disinformation this election year. They faced a surge of false claims on their platforms after President Trump addressed the nation early on Wednesday. Mr. Trump claimed that he won the election despite several states still counting votes even now. The president also took to social media, writing, quote, "We are up big, but they are trying to steal the election. We will never let them do it. Votes cannot be cast after the polls are closed." Facebook and Twitter have since labeled several of the president's posts and those of his supporters, warning users that some content may be disputed and votes are still very much being counted. To break down misinformation in the 2020 election, Fadi Quran joins me now. He's the campaign director at Avaz, a nonprofit organization that promotes global activism. Thank you for joining us. So talk to us about the role that social media, particularly Facebook, has played in the spread of false or misleading information this election year.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Lana. And what's happening is not normal because Americans are being flooded, but with misinformation, with false and misleading content from a large range of actors that is meant to deceive Americans and cause chaos and confusion across the country. And the tool that's being used is Facebook. The tool that's being used is Twitter. And so right now, social media platforms are trying to catch up, are trying to protect and inform their users. But the truth is they just haven't adopted the necessary policies to fix this problem at this moment. And that's what I believe the audience here needs to be aware of.
Yeah, so you're saying that that simply labeling these tweets, as we've seen Facebook, Twitter, and Google do, and suspending some accounts, that's insufficient. What more should these companies be doing to address the problem of misinformation then?
Well, one thing we're seeing a lot is by the time the misinformation spreads, so I'll give an example that happened during election. There were false claims about irregularities, and a hashtag called Steal the Vote and a hashtag called Philly Steal began going viral. Hundreds of thousands, we've calculated, of Americans have seen that false misinformation. The platforms eventually caught up and began labeling them, but by that time it was a little bit too late. So one thing the platforms can do is inform Americans. When they know that certain people saw this misleading content, the platforms can track that and just share a correction, telling Americans, here's an alert, sorry you saw this piece of content, here's a correction from the Associated Press or from the Washington Post or from another fact checker. Doing that would decrease the amount of people that are duped by this content by up to 50%, certain studies indicate.
So actually grouping together the true information with the false information rather than just labeling things as questionable is your suggestion, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like what newspapers do. When something false is caught, newspapers give you more information. They say, sorry, this was actually not true. Here is what fact checkers say the true claim is. And then people can decide, but at least they have the facts. And that's what we are asking you, just getting a small notification on that front.
Well, Pennsylvania is a major battleground state this election. It's still undecided, and disinformation on the electoral process there flooded online outlets. You called this, quote, attempts at perception hacking. Explain to us what that means and what we're seeing throughout the state.
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is one of the challenges that I believe every American citizen needs to keep in mind. What certain malicious actors will want to do is convince you that there's a huge scandal. They want to hack your mind by making it seem as if something small. So let's say there was an accident at a certain polling station where 10 ballots went missing. They'll share that to make it seem like this is happening all over the country and thus hack your perception, making it seem as if there's chaos and everything's falling apart. And there's a danger here that we need to just be aware of in terms of social media platforms make it very easy for these malicious actors to do that. And that's why we just call on every American to verify the content they see, to not assume that because somebody such as, let's say, we don't know, but maybe Russia takes a piece of misinformation and tries to make it seem like they've achieved a big success by hacking into a system. Don't spread that because likely this didn't happen. They just want to make it seem like it did. And that's a danger.
All right. Well, the coronavirus pandemic and how it's been handled has been front and center this election year. And not surprisingly, it also became the target of misinformation campaigns. What were some of the more alarming falsehoods that your team came across?
Well, some of the alarming falsehoods, and this was, our calculation found that over 3.8 billion views, estimated views on content that was shared by super spreader misinformation actors was seen across the world in the moment where COVID went viral. And here, one claim, for example, was telling people that if you could hold your breath for more than 10 seconds, that, Stanford Hospital said that you don't have COVID-19. And a lot of people shared that it wasn't true. But in April, many people believed it was true. And then this is the most dangerous part. Some people are claiming that they have a cure, and they're selling different medicines, different herbs, different things, making it seem as if they're doctors when they're not really doctors, and telling people to take these medicines. And that is also dangerous. Some people have actually been working with doctors. Doctors have told us some people have taken these false cures, and it has led to not only them harming themselves, but some people actually passing away. So that's another danger. And last but not least, a third piece of misinformation is we have seen too many people share claims about wearing masks, that if you wear a mask, it's going to cause certain lung problems, that it's going to make the virus worse. All of these claims are false. Doctors have reached a consensus that it's important to wear masks to protect against COVID, but yet these false claims are going viral, sometimes reaching over 100 million views across Facebook and other social media platforms.
All right, before we go, what would you give us as advice for all social media users? Things that we should keep in mind as we await the results of the election?
Well, with freedom comes great responsibility. And let's all keep in mind that too many people out there want to destroy this democracy that our forefathers fought for and built. And it's up to us right now to not allow them to do that. And the biggest risk to our democracy today is not claims of voter fraud, it's actually disinformation that is seeking to put us in alternative universes, make us feel like we are not seeing conspiracies. And too many Americans are falling for those claims. So let's be responsible. Let's verify content before we share it. Let's make sure that we do not spread the stuff we see on social media until we're sure that it is factual. And let's come together and be able to show empathy to one another at this moment.
Be empathetic. I think that's at the heart of it. Fadi Karan, thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with the rest of the day's news. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO. Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to Black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
Sometimes we just need to take a break. We acknowledge that many of you might have had election anxiety. So right now, I want to encourage you all to just take a deep breath and take a look at this. This Chinese baby panda made her public debut at a zoo in South Korea on Wednesday. She's just over 3 months old and is the first panda born in the country. The zoo named her Fu Bao, which means lucky treasure baby. Her parents arrived in South Korea in 2016 as part of a 15-year loan. The cub is expected to return to China in 3 or 4 years' time. Giant pandas are one of the world's most endangered species. All right, well, here's a look at some of the stories that we're going to be covering in our next hour. Coronavirus cases are on the rise in nearly every state across the country, why some hospitals are worried they could soon run out of beds. Plus, Joe Biden moves closer to the White House after securing 2 key Midwest states President Trump won back in 2016. We'll have the latest CBS News projections ahead, so stick with us. You're streaming CBSN, CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO. Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX 5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
You can watch CBSN 24/7.
I've got an amazing story to share with you.
I understand you have some breaking news.
How does it all play out?
It's quite an adventure here at CBSN.
It's been a day.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. Thank you so much for joining me. Joe Biden is inching closer to the 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. Biden's chances of capturing the White House were improved by victories in 2 states that President Trump won back in 2016. CBS News projects that Biden will win Michigan and its 16 electoral votes. CBS News also projects that the former vice president is the presumptive winner in Wisconsin, which has 10 electoral votes. There are still several states, of course, where the race is too close to call. Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia are all considered toss-ups. Out west, the races in Arizona and Nevada are likely Democratic. But all of that isn't stopping President Trump from falsely declaring victory in some of those states. His campaign is also mounting legal challenges. In several states, the president appears to have lost. For his part, Joe Biden said Wednesday that he believes that he will be the winner once all of the votes are counted. At least 70 million Americans have voted for the former vice president, with at least 67 million casting their ballots for President Trump. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe has the latest.
Joe Biden said today the wave of ballots trickling in over the last 24 hours is enough to put him over the top.
After a long night of counting, it's clear that we're winning enough states to reach 270 electoral votes needed to win the presidency. I'm not here to declare that we've won, but I am here to report when the count is finished, we believe we will be the winners.
The Biden campaign feels they have a clear path to 270 electoral votes, with both Arizona and Nevada leaning blue, plus a presumptive win in Wisconsin and a victory in Michigan, giving him 2 key battleground states he needs.
In Michigan, we lead by over 35,000 votes, and it's growing. A substantially bigger margin than President Trump won Michigan in 2016.
But as angry Trump supporters demanded entry to a ballot processing center in Detroit today, the Trump campaign sued to stop the Michigan count, arguing they need to review the ballots already opened and counted.
ballots. This is fraud. This is absolute fraud.
The Trump campaign is also trying to stop the count in Pennsylvania, where the president currently has an edge. But there are more than 1 million ballots uncounted, many from Democratic-leaning cities and counties.
We're going to win Pennsylvania, but they're trying to cheat us out of it because they know it's their only path to victory.
The president's legal team is hoping the Supreme Court will strike down a lower court's decision to count Pennsylvania mail-in ballots received by Friday, but that were postmarked by Election Day. The court previously refused to do so.
We want the law to be used in a proper manner. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
Despite Biden's victory in Wisconsin, with almost every vote counted, the president's campaign demanded a recount, though it's unlikely to substantially change the outcome. President Trump took his anger out on Twitter today, falsely claiming that his leads in Democrat-run states started to magically disappear as surprise ballot dumps were counted. Twitter flagged them as misleading, as those votes were legally cast and returned by the deadline. Biden's fortunes turned in the last 24 hours because he was able to win back Michigan and Wisconsin, two states that went for Mr. Trump in 2016, by flipping independents and building on then-nominee Hillary Clinton's lead among women. He also performed better among union households than Clinton did in Michigan. In Arizona, he won among white women with college degrees and seniors, two groups that went for the president 4 years ago.
For more, we go now to Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's CBSN's political reporter and joins me now from Philadelphia. Caitlin, you're there in Pennsylvania, 20 electoral votes. What's the latest on the vote count there?
They are still counting votes here in Pennsylvania. The Secretary of State held a news conference this evening and says that there are still about 1 million ballots left to be counted. Many of them are being counted in this building right behind me, the Pennsylvania Convention Center, where workers have been working around the clock in 8-hour shifts, processing and tabulating all of those ballots. We knew going into this election that Pennsylvania was likely going to take a while to count results. That's because this is the first time Pennsylvania has had no excuse absentee voting for a presidential race. They had a record number of people voting that way, and Pennsylvania state law says that you can't start opening up those ballots to be processed until Election Day. So we knew it would take a while. The Secretary of State says they're still counting ballots and that it'll likely be a few days before they finish.
Yeah, unlike other states in which they started opening those ballots, processing them, getting them all ready before Election Day, Pennsylvania was restricted from being able to do that. The Trump campaign filed a lawsuit in Pennsylvania seeking to stop the counting of ballots. It took similar action in Michigan, and at the same time, the campaign is also calling for a recount in Wisconsin. It's also lashing out at some media organizations who have called Arizona for Joe Biden, though we should note, of course, that CBS News has not yet made a projection for Arizona, but currently rates the state as likely Democratic. Caitlin, take us through the arguments that we're hearing from the president and his campaign. What is their strategy?
Well, their strategy seems to be that they don't want the vote counting to continue, and that suggests that they don't believe that they could win when all the votes are counted. Remember, this is how elections work. You wait till all of the votes are counted. The votes that we're talking about here in Pennsylvania were all votes that are being tabulated right now that were cast by or on Election Day. So that is really key to remember, that these are all legally cast ballots. The president heading into this campaign had derided mail-in ballots and absentee voting. He denigrated that system and had been claiming heading into the election that it would be a fraudulent one. And we're seeing him continue to talk about that strategy. We also saw the campaign really focused heading into the election on Election Day voters. They argued that they would make up the margins in the absentee vote with voters on Election Day. Now, the president did better than expected, better than the polls suggested, especially in some of these key battlegrounds. And we're seeing down ballot Republicans surviving in Senate races, and also Republicans expanding their seats in the House. Even still, however, the votes still need to be counted here in Pennsylvania before anybody can declare any sort of victory. The Trump campaign trying to do that is just absolutely false. The Trump campaign also has said, without any evidence, that this is a fraudulent system. But again, we're just reminding viewers that these are all ballots that were cast legally on or by Election Day.
Yeah, and we heard the Pennsylvania authorities also indicate that you can watch in real time people processing the ballots, that everything is in fact above board, as we just showed our viewers a little bit ago. Well, Caitlin, the president had also indicated that he wants to take the election to the Supreme Court. Under what conditions might that happen?
That would be very difficult, Lana, especially because anything that would make its way up to the Supreme Court would have to start at the local level. Here in Pennsylvania, as we've talked about before, the state Supreme Court said that ballots received after Election Day, up to 3 days after Election Day, as long as they were postmarked by Election Day, could still be counted. And this is something that Republicans here in the state challenged. That went up to the Supreme Court. They were 4-4 court at that point and kicked it back here, but conservative justices on the Supreme Court didn't rule out the possibility of ruling on that after the election. But what we're going to be watching in the coming days here in Pennsylvania are what are the margins, and do you even need to have those votes later to make up some of those numbers? In other words, if Joe Biden is leading here by a healthy amount of votes, it would be very difficult to say that the rest of those votes couldn't count. But here in Pennsylvania, as it stands right now, if your ballot ends up arriving up until Friday, it is still going to be counted.
And we're showing our viewers right now the latest standing in terms of Pennsylvania. How is the Biden campaign preparing for a potential lengthy legal challenge by the Trump campaign if, in fact, that balance tilts towards Biden and the election is called for him after all of the ballots are counted?
Well, tonight the Biden campaign is seeming to be pretty confident. You saw the former vice president speak with Kamala Harris tonight, this afternoon in Delaware, urging all of the votes to be counted before any decisions are made. But we have called the race for him in Michigan and Wisconsin, those key states that Hillary Clinton lost by narrow margins and helped deliver Donald Trump a victory in 2016. Pennsylvania was also one of those states that was determined by a very slim margin as well. The Biden team has a team of lawyers, as does the Trump team. They were all prepared for going down to the wire, especially in a place like Pennsylvania, to make sure all those ballots are counted. The question is, does it even have to get to that point? We're still waiting on Arizona and Nevada to be called. If they are called for Biden and he's winning Michigan and Wisconsin, that puts him on the path to collect those 270 electoral votes.
Right, independent of Pennsylvania. All right, Caitlin, I want to talk to you in my last couple of moments with you about the U.S. Postal Service. They are ignoring a federal judge's order to sweep processing plants for mail-in ballots. The reason why they were asked to do this was more than 300,000 scanned ballots couldn't be traced. According to new data filed Wednesday, nearly 7% of ballots in the USPS facilities were not processed on time for submission to election officials. What is the impact of this, Caitlin? And is there any way for those votes, people who cast their ballots before Election Day, to actually have their votes counted?
Well, this was what election officials were warning about in states like Pennsylvania and around the country, was these delays in the Postal Service. And they had been urging people to get their ballots in as soon as they possibly could or drop them off in person. And we actually heard that a lot from voters, that towards the end of this campaign, there was a real distrust in the Postal Service or an anxiety about getting it in on time. So what you're just describing really depends on what state you're in. As I mentioned, here in Pennsylvania, they'll accept those ballots up to 3 days after Election Day. But in some states, they had to arrive by Election Day. In some states, you're allowed to track your ballot. You're able to scan your ballot, track it through the system to make sure it got in on time. But again, this is a system that varies state to state. And so the rules really do just vary state to state. So in some cases, that could have an impact.
Caitlin, you have gotten very little sleep, but have been on top of it all. You're doing an excellent job. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
CBSN will, of course, have continuing coverage as votes come in. Don't forget to tune in on Thursday for a very special edition of Red and Blue, hosted by my colleague Elaine Quijano, who will break down the latest election results with our team. That's from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBSN. Federal officials say the 2020 presidential race has been one of the most secure in the nation's history. But as we anticipate final results, many Americans remain concerned about potential election meddling and the possibility for foreign interference. Greg Bauer is a former U.S. attorney and a former assistant director for the FBI and joins me now from Washington. Greg, great to have you. So right off the bat, have we seen any significant security threats yet to this year's election?
We have not, that we are aware of. As you mentioned, since the lessons learned from the 2016 presidential election, the effort by the federal government as a whole and by state and local governments and private sector partners has really been unprecedented. It's been what you might call an all-of-government effort, incredible amount of resources devoted to making sure that our election infrastructure is able to withstand attacks. And make no mistake about it, those attacks are a daily occurrence. Government systems at the state, federal, and local levels are subject to attacks by our adversaries, the Russians, the Iranians, and others on a daily basis. But the idea is to be able to allow those infrastructure components to withstand those attacks. And so far, it does appear that that has been successful in 2020.
Well, we know foreign operatives have tried to use disinformation to meddle in U.S. elections. This year, Twitter took down some fake Associated Press accounts that were inaccurately calling races. What other suspect online activity have you been seeing in this election?
Well, there's been quite a bit, and that's, of course, a different sort of attack than the attacks on the infrastructure, the sort of hacking attacks, the cyber attacks that we see. The attacks based upon disinformation are also carrying over from 2016, where we know that the Russians were at least very prolific, if not successful. And so it's hard to immediately notice when it's out there, but rest assured, and the public ought to be aware of the fact that when they see certain posts on social media, it may be a foreign adversary trying to influence the thinking of Americans as the election approached. And so, we hope, of course, that did not play any significant influence on the outcome, but rest assured it was happening.
We have heard President Trump cast aspersions on the electoral process and the security of it, and we know that U.S. intelligence officials have worked very hard to make this election secure. Overall, how good of a job did we do as a country?
Well, so far it would appear that we've done very well. I would suggest that the predictions by the Department of Homeland Security that this would be the most secure election in U.S. history will probably turn out to be true. We haven't seen any evidence so far of any sort of penetration into the system by a foreign adversary in a way that would make a difference in the outcome of the vote. And I don't think we're going to see that in the days to come. So on the whole, it would appear to be a success so far.
And of course, given the pandemic, more Americans cast their votes by mail this year than ever before. How did that affect the risks?
Well, the vote by mail reality presents a whole separate, I would suggest, set of potential risks than the traditional cyber threat that the Department of Homeland Security and others have spent so much time and energy in preparing for over the last 4 years. But it seems as though the state and local electoral infrastructures around the country have done a good job of anticipating the volume of mail-in ballots. And we are, of course, witnessing now the continuation of the counting of those ballots. But it looks like it's all happening according to plan, and it should be completed soon. So I think that, given all of the challenges of the pandemic and all of the threats out there with respect to our electoral infrastructure, we're doing pretty well.
All right, that's good to hear. Greg Bauer, thank you.
Thank you.
Democrats are eyeing Nevada and Arizona. If Joe Biden can hold on to his leads there, he will win the White House. Jamie Yuccas is in Phoenix. Jamie, what are you hearing there?
We are expecting a new tally here in Arizona tonight between in-person and mail-in ballots returned on Election Day Arizona is tabulating about 600,000 votes. Just over 2/3 of those are in Maricopa County, which is the state's biggest voting area and includes Phoenix and its suburbs. It's a fast-growing and diverse area. Arizona has been reliably Republican, but former Vice President Joe Biden has been ahead in the state so far. Trump would need to win these uncounted ballots by a huge margin to overtake Biden's lead. The Arizona Attorney General's office says hundreds of voters have raised concerns that the use of Sharpie markers may have caused ballots to be rejected. State officials say that's not the case, and it's still a waiting game in Nevada. Mail-in ballots received on Election Day and those that will be received this week still need to be counted. Nevada's next update won't be before tomorrow morning. Lana?
All right, thank you, Jamie. A record number of people voted this election, and on Wednesday, with some states still up in the air, protesters across the country rallied to, quote, protect the results. Mola Langi is in New York City with the very latest.
There are about 1,000 people here at this Manhattan Park, having taken to the streets earlier this afternoon, demanding that every vote counts. Now, these folks marched about 30 to 40 blocks through Manhattan, finally arriving here at Washington Square Park. Organizers are calling it a Protect the Vote, Protect the Results rally, saying they want to keep the pressure on and make sure that ballot counting in this presidential election is not stopped prematurely in some of the closely contested states that remain. We've seen pro-Joe Biden signs and T-shirts. We've heard anti-Donald Trump chants out here. This is a mostly Joe Biden supporting crowd. Some protesters are accusing President Trump of trying to steal this election. Now, this is just one of a dozen similar rallies happening across the country, from Philadelphia to Chicago to Washington, D.C., where there are about 100 protesters gathered. Protesters have been largely peaceful out here, but of course there are dozens of NYPD police officers who are out here and who in fact flanked the crowds as they marched down here to the park, and they say they are ready, not just tonight, but they will be for the next few days, keeping an eye and monitoring any potential unrest in the aftermath of this election.
Nevada is not expected to release election results until Thursday. Right now, former Vice President Joe Biden holds a narrow lead there over President Trump. In 2016, Hillary Clinton won Nevada by more than 27,000 votes. Election officials say a majority of the ballots waiting to be tabulated come from Clark County, which includes Las Vegas. That area makes up about 2/3 of the state's population. For more on this, let's bring in Nevada's Attorney General, Aaron Ford. Attorney General Ford, it is great to have you with us this evening. So, what percentage of your ballots have been counted at this point? And what are election officials waiting on now? Specific counties, mail-in ballots? What happens next in your state?
Well, thanks so much for having me on. And if you would allow me to indulge me, I just first want to say I'm incredibly proud of Nevada's elections this year. All of the evidence, whether it's in court or otherwise, has shown that our state has conducted some free, fair, and secure elections, and Nevadans have been able to exercise their constitutional rights during this pandemic. And listen, we knew the process would take a while, but the process is working. And, we are grateful to our citizens out there who voted this year and for doing their part. To your question, though, my last understanding is that 83% or so of the vote is in right now. We have registrars in Clark County and Washoe who are still counting ballots, predominantly mail-in ballots, as I understand it. That is within the lane and the purview of our registrars and our Secretary of State. But the common knowledge out there is that we have mail-in ballots to still count, and we're anticipating results tomorrow sometime.
All right. Well, former Vice President Biden currently holds a narrow lead over President Trump, as I mentioned. What kind of impact will Clark County have on the final results? And given the demographics of Clark County and the economic hardship that you face there, specifically in that part of your state, any thoughts about whether you feel like it's going to be good for Biden or for President Trump?
Well, I'll say this. Clark County has about 2/3 of the state's population. And so whatever amount of outstanding ballots are yet to be counted, there's going to be an extraordinary impact from Clark County on that. And my job is essentially to protect the right to vote. I do believe that Biden is going to prevail in this particular instance. But again, my objective is to ensure that all people who have voted lawfully have their votes counted. That's the constitutional right that they have here. That's my job to protect it. And at the end of the day, the word result means after all votes have been counted, and that's what we're doing here in Nevada.
And that's absolutely the goal that every American should have for their elections. All right, both the Nevada Republican Party and the Trump campaign are already encouraging people who experienced voting challenges to file incident reports. But one of our campaign reporters, Kara Corti, discovered that residents from any state can file. Why is this, and how could this affect a potential recount or any future lawsuits?
Well, I can't say that I can speak entirely on the issue of who can file these claims. My understanding was that it had to be someone who lived in a particular district that someone was voting in. That notwithstanding, the fact of the matter is poll observers are allowed to be in there observing. And as long as they're not intimidating or even speaking to voters, they can raise concerns and questions through the proper channels. What we have here is a robust scheme to ensure that all votes are lawful and that they've been cast and counted appropriately. The courts have upheld that process, and I'm proud of that.
And you deserve to be proud of that. I think it is one of those things where, as a country, even with all the partisan bickering that preceded the election, there has to be an understanding that fundamentally our democracy is reliant upon this working out properly. To that end, though, are you preparing for potential litigation?
Absolutely. I've said before that we stay ready so we don't have to get ready. I have an entire office here that is prepared to defend the constitutional right to vote. We've done it 3 times against Mr. Trump and the Nevada GOP, and we prevailed every time. We will continue prevailing because what we are doing here is following the state law and ensuring, again, that people have their right to vote, that they can exercise it, and that their vote will be counted.
I like that. I like that motto. Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. All right. My last question to you, sir. For the first time in your state's history, every single active voter in Nevada was sent a mail-in ballot. How did this impact turnout?
I think it impacted it greatly. I mean, the fact of the matter is our legislature, in its infinite wisdom, correctly, I believe, wanted to authorize folks to be able to exercise their right free from COVID if they wanted to. And so they mailed every active voter a ballot, and several have taken advantage of that. And at the end of the day, again, those ballots are an opportunity for people to express their opinion on this election. They have been doing so, and we want to ensure that at the end of the day, they have their voices heard through the accurate and actual counting of these votes.
One last question for you, Attorney General. The rest of the country talking about your state a lot right now. I know it's always a pain to your ears when you hear the rest of us, non-Nevadans, mispronounce your state's name. Why don't you help us all out? How do you properly say Nevada? It's Nevada, not Nevada, right?
That's right. It's Nevada, not Nevada. Just like my name is Aaron, not Aaron. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide 2 lessons here. It's Nevada, not Nevada, and it's Aaron, not Aaron.
All right. Thank you so much, Attorney General.
Thank you.
Coronavirus cases continue to surge across the country. The total number of cases nationwide is now climbing towards 9.5 million, and the death toll has topped 233,000. Nancy Chen is in New York City, where officials are anxiously watching the numbers.
With hospitalizations at a record high in Nebraska, health officials are looking to borrow nurses from other states. And hospitals in Iowa and Missouri say bed capacity could soon be overwhelmed. Infection rates are on the rise in nearly every state. Michigan is averaging more than 3,000 new cases a day, leading the state's largest county to postpone jury trials until next year. And the virus continues to throw a shadow over the football season. The San Francisco 49ers shut down their facility after a player tested positive.
Here in New York, the city has struggled back to life by keeping the infection rate under control. But the mayor says he's worried numbers are ticking higher.
The city's average rate of positive test results is hovering just over 1.7%.
To the extent we stabilize around that level, that's something that we can handle for now. But again, that's not where we want to be for the long term. We're going to have to really buckle down to push that number back down.
In Europe, a lockdown goes into effect on Thursday in the UK, closing non-essential businesses and leading to a last-minute rush to hair salons.
I didn't want to have to wait like I did before. The 3 months, it was a nightmare.
I've driven in from outside London to get my last blow dry before we locked down.
The World Health Organization says cases in Italy skyrocketed 72% in the last week. At the Vatican, Pope Francis spoke from his private library, urging followers to obey health authorities and defend against the pandemic. Nancy Chen, CBS News, New York.
Coming up after the break, as more results come in, we're getting a better idea of who may control the balance of power in Washington. Ahead, we take a closer look at races for the House and the Senate. Plus, how the African American vote is impacting the election results. We'll hear from the president of the NAACP on issues that drove voters to the polls. This is CBSN. CBS News, always on.
So, I've got a question for you. What if you could watch all the CCO news you want and see all your favorite CCOers anytime, anywhere? Well, you can. Go ahead and grab your phone. Come on, I know it's close by. And go to WCCO.com or get the app and poof, there we are, right next to all those other networks you stream. Bonus time, it's free. You heard right, zip nada zilch, for free. CBSN Minnesota, built by CBS News, powered locally by WCCO. Wherever you are, wherever you go, breaking Bay Area news, live.
This is CBSN Bay Area. I'm Michelle Griego.
CBSN Bay Area, in your hand, on demand, and absolutely free. Highly updated top local stories and weather where you live. Available everywhere. Powered by KPIX5 News. CBSN Bay Area. Always on, always free at KPIX.com.
We spoke to black officers all around the country about the challenges that they face.
When you're not in uniform, are you ever concerned for your safety?
Out of uniform, I'm just another guy. I'm a black man first.
CBSN Pittsburgh, your neighborhood news, streaming 24/7. Anytime, anywhere. Find it on KDKA.com and on all your favorite devices.
Ahead of Election Day, it seemed unthinkable to many Republicans that Georgia could be in play for Joe Biden. The president started the day in the lead. Mark Strassman is in Atlanta and joins us now. So, Mark, with about 68,000 votes separating the two candidates now, does Joe Biden have a chance there in Georgia?
It's certainly plausible that Joe Biden could still win Georgia. Most of these uncounted ballots are from Metro Atlanta. These are urban and suburban voters, generally warm to Democrats. That is State Farm Arena behind me. Joe Biden needs a big comeback inside that arena. This is where Fulton County election officials are still counting ballots. Fulton, which includes much of Atlanta, has the most registered voters in all Georgia. It's also dominated by Democrats. Biden should win most of these uncounted ballots, a mix of absentee and early votes. At noon today, Georgia had 250,000 of them. And elections officials told me Biden would need to win 64% of those votes to win the state. From its very first day of early voting, Georgia smashed records, nearly 5 million votes cast in all. The state's changing demographics mean it's no longer automatically a red state. The counting of ballots will go on through the morning. And Lana, state officials are also bracing for the possibility of a recount.
All right, Mark, we are preparing for that as well. Thank you. As the nation awaits the final results for this year's election, the black vote could help determine who wins the White House. According to the Pew Research Center, 30 million African Americans were eligible to vote this year, making up more than 12% of the U.S. electorate. More than a third also live in 9 of the country's most competitive states. For more, I'm joined now by Derek Johnson, the president and CEO of the NAACP. Derek, thank you for joining us. We are still waiting for votes to be counted in several key states. And you heard us perhaps just now discussing Georgia and the idea that could that previously solidly red state could potentially flip. How much are black voters changing the outcomes, especially in these southern states?
Well, if you look at the states that are under considerations and where in those states the concerns are: Detroit, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and now Fulton County, Cobb County, in the Metro Atlanta area, that's about the black vote. And what you also are noticing that those votes are the last to get counted. This election will be decided because of the black vote. It will be decided in those areas. And then when you add in Clark County in Nevada, it shows the power of the African American and Latino vote in that area. But the black vote will determine the next president, and that's so important.
Your organization obviously prioritized increasing voter participation within the Black community. Are you satisfied now with those efforts?
Well, we are satisfied at the level we participated, but we're not satisfied because in this democracy, we celebrate if any community can muster 55 or 60% of the vote. That's not a true representative democracy. We need to be advocating on ways to open up access to voting for all citizens. If Australia can vote at a rate at 96%, or Canada at 92%, Germany at 93%, why should we settle for this government only allowing 55 to 60% of the vote, and we say that's a high turnout? We should be pushing for more to have a true representative democracy.
Absolutely. Well, the death of George Floyd at the hands of police earlier this year sparked nationwide protests against police brutality and racial injustice. How much did the Black Lives Matter movement drive Black voters to participate in the electoral process?
But understand, Black Lives Matter is a statement of fact. It is something that we hold dear. It is something where individuals rallied in protest around in the 1960s, the 50s for that matter, 70s. And so the movement is the ongoing movement. We simply used to call it the civil rights movement or the human rights movement. But the statement of fact is what people are rallying around, that our quality of lives matter, that we should be afforded equal protection under the law. That's what it means to say Black Lives Matter. It's a statement of fact. And in this society, the Constitution should apply to us as it does any other citizen.
But maybe my question wasn't clear, sir. What I'm asking is, how much do you think that that African American voters turned out in this election as a result of witnessing George Floyd's death, Breonna Taylor's death? And we could go on and name names, but certainly there has been a moment of national reckoning that continues now, that in our democracy certainly had an effect. How much was that an effect? And how much would you say the coronavirus pandemic, which has disproportionately affected people of color, how much did that drive Black voters to participate? In many cases, people who had not previously been engaged in the democratic process.
I think all those things were factors. I don't think it's any one thing. I think all of it. I think the last 3.5 years with the level of racial hatred, xenophobia, and white supremacist acceptance have played a part of it. We have seen the loss of civility in our public discourse. We have seen the acceptance of white supremacist dogma coming out of the White House. So African Americans turned out in large numbers in 2008 prior to George Floyd. African Americans have been frustrated and upset and concerned, and quite frankly, recognizing that we needed to vote in this election because our very lives depend on it, whether it's aggressive policing in the street, i.e. George Floyd, individuals causing no harm, sleeping in their own bed, Breonna Taylor, or the fact that our public policy was not strong enough under this administration to address a global health pandemic that's national in scope, and we still lack a federal response. It's all of those things that are contributing to the level of anxiety, frustration, and fear in the African American community that push people out to the polls.
No matter who ultimately wins the presidency, Derek, what kind of change are you hoping to see within our government?
Well, one, we have to have a more representative democracy. We need to take a serious look on the administration of the election. It is so partisan now, and it should not be partisan. It should be a part of what we do to protect and grow this democracy. Two, we need to make sure that individuals are cared for in terms of their health, their safety, their ability to really benefit from the tax dollars they put into the coffers. But more importantly, the health of any society is based on three basic metrics. How well do we care for the elderly? Are we preparing our young people for a bright and prosperous future? And do we protect the right of the disadvantaged? If we create a policy landscape to address those three questions, that will be light years compared to where we are now in this in this racially polarized, tribalistic manner in which we communicate. We have an opportunity to be a better America, an America that looks towards 2030, not an America that's looking backwards to 1950.
All right, Derek Johnson, thank you.
Thank you.
The outcome of the presidential election is still too close to call, and so is the balance of power in Congress. On the Senate side, Democrats would still need to flip several seats to retake control. Deborah Alfarone has the latest from Capitol Hill.
The ballots continue to be counted across several key states, with neither party coming away with the majority in the U.S. Senate so far.
We're awaiting the judgment of the American people.
The Senate's top Republican, Mitch McConnell, held on to his Senate seat, as did South Carolina's Lindsey Graham.
We did it!
While this election may be over, we have to work together.
In Maine, Democratic challenger Sarah Gideon conceded to moderate Republican Susan Collins.
To the people of Maine, thank you.
Former Auburn University football coach, Republican Tommy Tuberville, is projected to flip Alabama's Senate seat after defeating incumbent Democrat Doug Jones. Former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, a Democrat, will unseat Republican Cory Gardner.
Let's get to work, Arizona.
Democrats are also keeping a watchful eye on Arizona's race, where Democrat Mark Kelly leads GOP incumbent Martha McSally. The Democrats came up short in their push to flip GOP Senate seats in Iowa, Montana, and Texas. Losing Democratic challengers combined outspent their Republican opponents by at least $120 million.
Money doesn't vote, people do. The polling was off.
On the House side, Republican leaders are in a celebratory mood after flipping several more seats than the Democrats have so far.
I'm very confident we continue to grow our majority.
There's more to come.
CBS